Okay, so this next week of lessons, we'll have time to work with the students on the process of empathy mapping, having them actually practice the skill of empathy before they go into doing their empathy summative, which is going to lead into them writing their proposals. So the first day, you can do a warm up, just having them think about what comes to their mind when they hear or see the word empathy, just like a quick think, pair, share. Then the next step would be to play this video. It's a 4-minute video on method acting. I think the students tend to find it interesting because it's going to reference a lot of stars and characters that they're familiar with. And then you'll have them reflect after the video, why do you think method acting works? Do they have any favorite movie performances that they know are by method actors? What is it that makes it, or do they think method acting works? And then why do they think it works so well? The video references, like if you're looking just straight at statistics, method acting works in the sense of number of method actors who've won Oscars, box office sales for method actors. And so they're just looking at the statistical aspect of that. And so ultimately kind of bringing them back to the point, or ultimately introducing the point that method acting is a form of empathy. The reason that method acting works is because the actor is spending months, sometimes even years prior to a role, empathizing with that character by living that character's life. So then we give the definition of empathy, that empathy by definition is the process of understanding and attempting to share the feelings of others. And then I'm going to point out here that in the key word is that it is a process, right? So it's a process that requires action. It's not just something. Often it's really easy to talk about empathy as like, it's caring about other people, but it isn't something that you can just do. It's a process that requires time and action, just like method actors have to do what they do for months. So that kind of leads into the activity for today, that for the next couple of days, you can sort of segue that we're going to practice the process of empathy, that there are things that we do in order to actually complete this task, which is to understand and share the feelings of others. So this is the activity for the day. It's going to require the materials that you're going to need in your classroom are a lot of Post-it notes. I'm going to cut my Post-it notes in half so that I'm not using too many, but you're going to want little pieces of paper, Post-it notes preferably, that you have cut in half. And you're going to tell the students to write down on the Post-it note these questions, answers to any of these questions. So you'll give a scenario. The scenario is going to be on the left. And then you're going to tell them that they should be writing down for the 2 minutes that you give them answers to these questions. What is the person thinking? What actions might they take? What emotions might they experience? How would they describe what they're experiencing? Meaning what words might come from their mouth or what comments might come from their mouth. You want to tell them in this process, and I put it here, for each scenario, keep the pile of Post-it notes separate. So you're going to have 4 scenarios, which means that they should have 4 piles on their desks. Post-it note 1, scenario 1, here are all my thoughts, put that pile in a corner. Here's all my thoughts for scenario 2, put that pile in a corner. So they're going to keep their piles separate, ultimately ending with 4 piles for each of these 4 different scenarios. So you'll give them 2 minutes. Okay, scenario 2. Again, what is this person thinking? What actions might they take? What emotions might they be experiencing? How might they describe their experience? Scenario 3, same thing. Scenario 4, same thing. So now they have 4 piles of Post-it notes. They might have 4 or 5 Post-it notes in each pile, but they have 4 piles of Post-it notes. So now in the next part of this activity, you are going to quickly explain the empathy map on this slide. Say that an empathy map requires you to place yourself in the mind of the user on what they say, meaning quotes and things you'd hear a person in the situation say. What they do is observable actions. Observable actions meaning things that are behaviors. What they think is their values, and you could associate that to what we talked about at the beginning of the year, which is social conditioning. What do they believe? What are their value system? What have they been socially conditioned to accept? And then feels is just emotions. Now, in this part of the activity, you're going to have the materials that is required is you're going to already have 4 of these empathy maps on a large piece of chart paper or bloc pinares. You'll have those sort of laid around the room or taped around the room, and you'll give them the directions to then organize each scenario. So each empathy map will represent a scenario. I have that explained here. It says walls. It should be on the posters. So there'll be 4 of these poster boards around the room, and you'll have them get up and place their Post-its in the quadrants according to the label. So for example, there's going to be a board that has this scenario, and they'll go and say, okay, for that scenario, this Post-it was about what they would say. This is what they would think. This is what they would do. This is what they would feel. There's 4 of those around the room. after you give them maybe 2 to 3 minutes to get up, take their Post-it note piles, maybe they'll start with pile 1, go to poster board 1 and say, okay, here's think, says, feels, does, go to Post-it board 2, go to poster board 2 with their pile 2 and kind of organize their Post-its. You'll split them into groups of 4. I'll just number off my kids 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. And then they have 10 minutes to look at that poster board and come up with an innovation, an idea, an app, a club, an organization, anything that they want that they think addresses the need of the user in that scenario. What you want to push is that while they're designing, they must really connect to the specific Post-it note. So they must look at the Post-it notes and say, oh, this user, based on the Post-it notes that I see the classmates came up with, this user feels lonely, scared, sad. They say things like this. They do things like this. So therefore, because they do this, our app would do this or our organization would do this. But it's basically just the first time they're practicing using empathy as a way to connect in building ideas. So you give them 10 minutes. Okay, guys, in 10 minutes, you're going to have to pitch to the class, sort of Shark Tank model, this initiative, this idea, this organization, this app that you think will work to meet the specific needs of this user based on your Post-it notes that you have at your board. Then they can go out and pitch. That might take, so after 10 minutes of letting them plan, each group pitches really quickly, like 2-minute pitch. It's sort of just fun. They get to share. And then that should take you to the end of class. If you have a little bit of time, have them sit down and do this exit ticket. What impact can you anticipate empathy mapping can have in shaping your ISE? So that is lesson plan 1. In theory, it takes a day. It could take a day and a half. It depends on your class. But the purpose of this lesson plan is to introduce them to the concept of, and help them understand the concept of empathy as a process. It's an action, just like method acting. They don't think about what it might be to be that character. They actually live out that character's life for months at a time. And that's the same thing about empathy mapping. You want to actually go into the process of what a user might think, feel, say, and do, which is what they're going to practice in that activity. Lesson plan 2, warm up. Just recap what are the things you ask on an empathy map. There's 4 things: think, say, feel, do. How can empathy help your innovation for social change process? That's just like a 2-minute warm up when they come into class. Then in Schoology, I'll put my kids in groups. Again, you guys might just have them do it with a partner sitting next to them or have them in groups of 4. I'll number my students off. One of my classes has a seating chart right now because they're being difficult, but they have assigned groups. They're going to access the link in the Cycle 3 folder. That gives them access to the Humans of New York page. You'll give each group an empathy map. You can print those. They're inside the empathy folder. So they're going to be right here. You'll find this in the folder, but you can print, oops, I don't know why that's there. You can print these out for each group. So you'll need this material for lesson plan 2. And while they're reading their Humans of New York story, they're using information from the story and their own inferencing skills. You can tell them, you can also inference here, guys, make assumptions based on facts in the story, what the person might be thinking, feeling, saying, or doing, essentially filling out an empathy map. After about 15 minutes of doing that, you'll have them rotate. So your groups are going to switch maps and not read the actual story, but instead they're going to use the empathy map to understand them. And then they're going to discuss, maybe on the back side, they can take down some notes. That if they had unlimited funds to create a nonprofit and some sort of innovation for social change for this person, what would they create? They'll have to look at that empathy map. They don't know the person. They haven't read the story because they switched maps, but they're looking at the empathy map to say, okay, what kind of nonprofit could create? What could we do for this person? In order to help support them based on what we read in this. So then if you wanted, after about 15 minutes of them doing that, you could have them go around and present or have them meet with I think the way you can either do full class presentations, the way I might do it is they'll meet with the group that they switched with and they'll share out. So based off of your empathy map, this is what we came up with. And then the other group will say, oh, okay, cool. That makes sense to the story. Or we might add this. Then that group will say, okay, based on your empathy map, this is what we came up with. Then this is the closing. It's a 2-minute video on why empathy is different than sympathy. I like to put like a question to consider. So while the video plays, this question will be on the side. I'll say, okay, guys, what you're going to share out after you watch this video is this question to consider. This is what you're going to share to each other after you watch the video. And that's the close for the day. Then that leads into, so then those are the 2 lesson plans on empathy processing and actually putting it into practice. So they'll do 2 practice models of that. And then the next lesson plans, we're going to introduce the formative and they'll work on that for the rest of the week. So this is a warm-up, just like has a bunch of empathy map filled out, and they can talk about what they might design. That's just a warm-up for day 3. They'll walk in, that'll be on the board. What would you make, considering all the information that you have on this map below? They've practiced this process now. And then we can introduce this formative. And they'll just be working on it in class for the next 2 class periods. I will go over this. We can look at it in our meeting on Tuesday, because we do meet on Tuesday. But basically, they're just doing an empathy mapping process with their family. The formative is that they're going to say, we have this issue with our family or this conflict. I'm going to interview. Family members become the users in this scenario. They're going to interview, question, WhatsApp, whatever, their family members, and then propose a solution based off of that information. So I have it sketched out for 2 days, basically saying like, hey, first day while they're working on it, they're thinking about what their issue is. Oops, this is day 1. They're describing their problem, thinking about what their issue is, and then in class kind of coming up with who in their family they need to interview and writing all their questions. Their homework would then be to go like talk to their family in the car ride home, at dinner, sending a WhatsApp to a brother or sister. And then the next day in class, they're putting that information together. So the whole class period is then putting that information together to come up with a solution based off of what they found in their empathy mapping process. But we can talk about this a little bit on Tuesday just to make sure it's super clear. But basically here, this you have from the beginning, lesson plan 1, showing empathy as a process. That's why they'll look at this method acting video. They'll do this post-it note brainstorm activity that leads them into splitting up into groups and building organizations or apps or whatever based off of the empathy map that they have in front of them. Then they pitch their ideas to each other. The next day, they're practicing that same skill again, but this time through Humans of New York. They'll access the Humans of the New York webpage, read a story in groups, fill out an empathy map in groups, come up with an idea in separate groups after having rotated that, or in the same groups, but with different empathy maps after they rotate the maps, and then close out video, which leads into days, that's day 1 and 2, and then days 3 and 4 is them working on this formative.